What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. I'm Ian Cummings, joined as always with my good friend and co-host Derek Tate, and we are through week 2 now for the college football season. It's crazy how fast it's going now that it's finally here. We say that every year, but it does start to pick up the pace a little bit, and already we have quite a few 2025 NFL Draft CFB storylines to go through. And we will get right into that. But first off, I got to ask my good buddy Derek, how are you doing, man? I know we were talking before the pod. You balance fantasy and scouting this time of year, so it can be a little hectic. How's your fantasy team doing so far? I got to ask. Week 1, are you 1-0 or are you 0-1?
So I'm in 7 different leagues.
7 leagues? Oh my goodness, man!
Yeah, I got a lot of dynasty teams that are like left over from years prior. So I only did one redraft. I'm 1-0 in that league, and I actually set a perfect. There's nothing quite like seeing you set the perfect lineup in week number 1. It just makes you feel like, and you get the win. It's like. Yeah, just good vibes when it comes to it. So, watching college football on Saturday and then watching your fantasy team have some success on Sunday and then get to, dive deeper into it. It's just been a good weekend of football. We're off to a good start.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to continue to be good football, I think, as we go on. And a lot of interesting storylines already on the CFB and NFL draft front. Our week 1, we were mainly talking about some of the more notable QB duels coming from that week. I know Connor Wegman and Riley Leonard was a big one in week 1. Cam Ward and Graham Mertz. And Cam Ward obviously stole the show there. So already a lot of developments on the QB side. So we will start this podcast with the QBs. I feel like it only feels right, especially with this class, right? Because Carson Beck has been pretty much churning along, right? And he hasn't been challenged too much, but against that Clemson defense, he did pick it up down the stretch. He at least led his team to a pretty solid win. So you look at that, and he's solid at the top. Shedeur Sanders played well in week 1, but week 2, some uncertainty. We'll get into that. But there's still that kind of unsettled feel to this QB class, right? Obviously at week 2, you're not going to have all the answers, but there's still a lot that we're waiting to see and waiting for in terms of what these prospects can do and how they can reaffirm their stock. So the biggest storyline, I think, from week number 2 was Michigan and Texas playing at high noon. Obviously, it was a high build contest. You got 2 CFB playoff contenders from the previous year rematching in this game, and it turned out to not be much of a game at all. Texas kind of ran away with it. On offense, they controlled the game, and on defense, I mean, Michigan's offense, they lost a lot. They lost JJ McCarthy. They lost their entire offensive line, I think, and then a few other weapons as well, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson. So it was not going to be pretty. We knew the offense had some uncertainty, some issues there, but Davis Warren just couldn't really pick anything up. Andrew Makuba played very well on the defensive side of the ball for Texas, but that entire unit was fast flowing, and they made it difficult for Texas for sure. But I think the biggest storyline was honestly Quinn Ewers playing the way that he did, and I think it feels right to start with that. Because myself, Derek, last year, I was pretty low on Quinn Ewers coming into the year last year because he's got the athleticism. He's got enough creative ability. I don't think he's an elite creative threat, but he's got enough, especially with that off-platform throwing ability, the arm elasticity, the angle freedom, things like that. Those are what makes his game special. But I didn't see the discipline with his mechanics that I would have liked to. This game against Michigan, man, and to be fair, Michigan or Texas was playing with a positive game script pretty much the entire time, right? Like they were in control of the game. I think that alleviates some pressure from the QB, but Ewers played out of his mind, man. I thought he was efficient. I thought he was disciplined, composed, a couple throws that maybe weren't as precise as you'd want here and there, but overall, I think there were some throws, especially with pressure bearing down on him up the interior, and he's stepping back, but he's still staying composed. And when he's drifting, he was actively using his angle freedom to correct that and get the ball where it needed to go. That level of control and discipline I haven't seen from him yet. And it kind of opened up a new thought pattern for me, a thought path for me, where Quinn Ewers has always been this kind of free-flowing, free-playing QB who's a little undisciplined with that. But if he can add discipline to his skill set with that high-end throwing talent, in this QB class, I think the sky is the limit. I think in this QB class, there's really no one precluding him from rising into the top 5 QBs. And from there, round 1 is not out of the discussion. So he was a 5-star recruit. He obviously has the natural talent. This was the first game of his entire career where I looked at it and said, I can see this actually coming to fruition. I can see him realizing that potential. And I'm impressed. I'm excited to see more. What were your thoughts on him?
Yeah, no, I mean, there was one throw in particular where he actually got pressure off of the edge, kind of slides right, and just flicks it off balance, but it was a layered throw over a linebacker in front of a safety over the middle of the football field. The composure, the poise. It felt like he was in command and in control. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to see from him in Michigan, with that, defense that is loaded with all kinds of NFL caliber talent. And he delivered. There's things about the way that, the mental makeup between the ears is what I wanted to see from Ewers, because you already went on and on about the talent, which is there physically, but boy, oh boy, from a composure and a poise and a command and a confidence standpoint, it was his demeanor, that settled everybody for that Texas offense in early on, because they saw how he was playing. And I don't want to speak too much about hyperbole, because there is some, X's and O's aspects of it that were very encouraging as well. I just mentioned one of the throws that I really liked from his game against Michigan, but the intangibles too were present in a big moment in this part of the season to send a statement against an opponent like Michigan with, Mason Graham and Will Johnson on the other side of the football. Yeah. He answered the bell in a big way. So Ewers' performance certainly elevates him in my eyes, something that is a major building block, and now has me very intrigued as we move forward for Texas, who looks like they're going to be in the college football playoff picture without a doubt.
Yeah, for sure. The entire team played well, but I think Ewers definitely, this was the first game where I was looking at it and saying, I can see him putting the pieces together now. It's not just a talent projection thing, against a really good defense, one of the best in the entire nation in Michigan. And again, I want to reiterate, I want to make clear, game script does have an effect, a big effect, because if you play with a lead the entire time, if you play with a pretty solid, strong lead the entire time, the pressure is off. You can play your game as an offense. Whereas with Michigan playing from behind the whole time, there was more pressure to generate big plays and actually get some movement going. So that pressure was never really felt by Quinn Ewers. So this was a game where we didn't get to see that. But I think, what are things that you need to control the game on the offensive side? Control, discipline, accuracy, being consistent on a down-to-down basis, especially when pressure is bearing down, and you have to move off your spot. And those categories, I thought Quinn Ewers was phenomenal. I thought he was exceptional. I think he did everything that he needed to do to keep control of the game, which is a very good thing. Texas playing in the SEC, so they will have many tough tests later on, and we will get to see more of Quinn Ewers and how he responds to that adversity. And you mentioned it too, probably a good chance that they're going to be in the CFB playoff. You never want to lock in a team, but sure, with the talent they have and the way Ewers is playing, and with the field expanding to 12 teams now, I would put the chances pretty high, up with the highest that there is among CFB teams. So Quinn Ewers played very well. And I think, from the NFL draft perspective, an element that's working just as much in his favor, I think, and we mentioned it earlier, but I'll expand on it here, is that I don't see anyone blocking him off, right? Carson Beck was my preseason QB1. He's been good. Again, he hasn't been, jaw dropping or anything. He's been solid, steady, only 2 weeks in, right? So we still have a very small sample size to go off of. So we gotta operate with that in mind too, knowing we can't run away with anything. Absolutely. But I think he's been good. Yeah. Again, I think he's been steady, and that's what you want from a QB, right? But if you look at a guy like Quinn Ewers, who has that next level of arm talent and elasticity, the angle freedom, the off-platform ability. Again, we keep talking about that. That's what makes Ewers special. I don't think his arm strength is elite, but his ability to throw from any kind of platform that you need him to, that meshes so well with the modern NFL, right? Boot actions, rollouts, being really manipulative and deceptive with the defense and the looks that you're giving them, right? And being able to adjust your throwing windows on the move too. Quinn Ewers fits into that category very well. So absolutely. Carson Beck, as much as talented as he is too, Ewers might have a little more of that creative aspect. And so that could be a separator if they get close enough. But Beck isn't holding him back. I don't think he's still my QB1. Shedeur Sanders, I think he can still be your QB1 too. I know he's heading into the year. We'll talk about that more later in a little bit here. But no, I think he plays well. It's just when he gets down, and especially with that offensive line, it's tricky. When you don't have the consistent pocket space to work with, and you start to see ghosts a little bit. You fall into those habits of trying to create space for yourself when nothing is there. So it's a positive feedback loop, and it's a bad positive feedback loop to have for Shedeur Sanders. But I think he's in that discussion still. But again, if Quinn Ewers continues to play the way he does, I don't think Sanders is the caliber prospect to hold him back from the top three.
No.
Jackson Dart, I don't think is either. Jackson Dart, he's been tearing up lower conference schools so far this year through the first 2 weeks, but he hasn't really been tested yet either to that degree. So I don't see any QB prospect holding Ewers back. Drew Aller, if he continues to play the way that he's been playing, there have been a few aberrations here and there, but his arm strength is through the roof, like probably 99th percentile in this class. So he is one where I could see that developmental potential being a separator. But, in summation, Quinn Ewers is on the rise, and there aren't too many obstacles between him and one of the top 3 QB spots if he can keep playing this way, especially through SEC play.
Yeah, no, he looked like a first rounder in this contest. Let's go there. But I mean, Obviously it's all about a body of work. We got to see, and you mentioned the game script. I want to see Ewers respond when Texas eventually finds themselves in a situation where they're trailing or a team is getting them out of their comfort zone. Is he able to stabilize that? We maybe didn't get an answer in that regard against Michigan, but that was partly because a big reason was Ewers' play on the road against Michigan. So I think that he passed this test with flying colors. It's just, can he continue to build upon this performance, which has me very intrigued about Ewers and certainly has his stock on ascending entering, I guess, week 3 of college football.
Yep. Ascending, right? You never want to run away with anything. And that's kind of the balance that we have to strike as draft analysts. Is like, hey, it's in motion, right? But we have a long way to go. So we'll keep watching. We'll try and get the full sample size. And I think another conversation to have within that lens is Shedeur Sanders, right? Let's talk about him. The Nebraska game was, we have to. It's one of those things that you can't really gloss over. The Nebraska game had a lot of hype coming in, a primetime matchup for Colorado, and Colorado did not come to play. Nebraska pretty much dominated that from the start. Ty Robinson was getting pressure right away on that first drive. I think he had the deflection and then the sack right up the middle. And, from there on, Dylan Raiola was playing very well. I think for a freshman, he looks really good. I think his name could be in discussion in a couple of years, but we're getting ahead of ourselves with that one. Shedeur Sanders was getting pressured a lot, and we started to see the same process that we saw last year a few too many times, which is the offensive line isn't really blocking well enough, right? And it's kind of snowballing into a lack of pocket poise, getting a little skittish, right? And then sometimes also hesitation coming in. I think his interception, his pick 6 to Tommy Hill, that was a design wide receiver screen where he had a whole second where he just delayed, it felt like, before that throw. And by the time he threw it, Tommy Hill was already breaking on it because his eyes were just frozen just for a little bit too long. On those quick throws, you can't freeze like that. And Sanders, I think he ended up maybe 24 for 45 for under 200 yards or something. I can't remember the exact stat line, but it was not very efficient. They really couldn't get anything done. And, again, it goes to the discussion of a QB versus his supporting cast. I still think the offensive line has major, major issues in Colorado. That's, they invested a lot in the transfer portal, and it didn't really pan out. And then at the same time, too, Shedeur Sanders was a little up and down for sure. I don't know, what were your initial, we can expand on it, but first your initial impressions on that Colorado matchup.
I mean, this is the type of game that makes you go, it sends up red flags for me. I get that there was pressure. I get that they have offensive line issues, but that pick 6 that he threw in the first quarter, it was a 7-0 game. Mm-hmm. I mean, and it was late, it was outside. And he doesn't have elite velocity on that arm. So if you're late outside, and that was actually from one of the cleaner pockets that he had in this contest. And for me, one of the things that I liked the most about Shedeur Sanders' profile was he was very risk adverse last season. Yeah. And, you throw a pick 6 on the road, go down 14-0, and then you kind of start to see the wheels come off a little bit for Colorado. And it's certainly his offensive line. I get it. Didn't do him a ton of favors. This team has issues on both sides up front. But you can't make it worse as a quarterback. And that's where some of the leadership qualities now that kind of, I think, were a little subjective. I didn't see the leadership qualities that I believe that he had entering this season in this one. When you walk off the football field before the game's even over, when your team just got its tail handed to you, unless something's going on physically, then you stay on the football field. And then even in the post-game presser, I want to get your thoughts on that, because
Yeah.
From a guy that I think can and does have first round talent, you want to see more accountability and responsibility taken when you don't play to your expectations. And it felt like he was trying to deflect to other people. I get that there were other issues, but it's not like he played a perfect game, and he helped put him in a 2-score hole on the road in the opening quarter with a poor decision and a poor throw. So that really rubs me the wrong way as far as this performance, because this is one I'm going to look at, because I like to take a look at when things are going great, when things are going well, and I like to look at a player's worst game when things aren't going well, and how do you respond?
Yeah.
And this is one that is going to be tough for me to overlook against Nebraska.
Yeah, for sure. And it's got to be a nuanced discussion, either way, right? I think character and leadership are things that are not easily quantifiable, right?
Sure.
And, Shedeur Sanders is a player who I think some of the operational parts of his game have been strengths in the past. I think, obviously on the field, accuracy, precision. I think pre-snap autonomy was really good in 2023. Yeah. I think you have a guy who can control that offense and has a good grasp of it, right? So it's not that he can't grasp it. It's not that he can't direct an offense within that lens, but, the leadership, right? I think there are more nuances, emotional nuances to it, especially at the NFL level when you're being tasked with leading an NFL franchise, right? The biggest thing that's concerned me with Shedeur, and to be fair, I want to reiterate, I don't have the full picture. None of us do, right? None of us have a lens in the locker room 24/7, seeing how he interacts with teammates, how they rally around him. So, we have a limited perspective here, but here's my perspective from what we've seen. In the summer, there was the whole thing with the transfer portal fiasco, where after the Colorado spring game, a great many players ended up entering the transfer portal and leaving the Buffalo program. And Shedeur Sanders was on Twitter saying these guys were mid. I don't remember them anyway, right? That's the first little red flag for me, because hey, it's their decision whether they want to stay or go, right? And it doesn't seem right to me to belittle and antagonize them after they make that decision, right? It doesn't feel right to me to say our team is better now because we lost those guys. When you have that level of an exodus, maybe it's time to look inward. Maybe could I do something better to help instill this culture with more positive qualities, right? So that lack of introspection, that lack of, kind of, hey, maybe this is a situation where I shouldn't speak on this and just kind of do my own thing.
Maturity.
Maturity, right? That was the first thing that rubbed me the wrong way. And then after this Nebraska game, you mentioned it, he walked off the field early. I think he might have gotten dinged up a little bit, so they were trying to preserve. But again, you can stay on the sideline, right? So, again, I don't want to criticize too much, but yes, that drew some eyes. And then at the presser, in regards to the interception, he said that was a rookie mistake. He's blaming the freshman receiver when your eyes were locked on that receiver for a full second. You're in your own goal line, right? Your back is in the end zone. You can't afford to wait that long. The moment you pulled that trigger, that was a bad decision because you waited too long. You keep the DB in. That's just as much on Shedeur. That pass should not have been thrown. And I know it's a tough decision. It's a tough situation when you're backed up like that because you don't have a lot of space to create for yourself either. But you just gave him 7 points right there. So that was on him just as much as the receiver. So not seeing the accountability being taken, right? And then at some point in the presser, it got pushed back to Dylan Raiola and the Nebraska offense. And Shedeur, I think what he said was, how many times did he get touched, right? Referring to, did he get pressured nearly as much as me? And
taking a shot at his own offensive line.
Exactly. And again, to be fair, yes, pressure was an issue for Shedeur Sanders in the offensive line. I think it was something that was counteractive to Shedeur's process overall. But you're the leader of your team. You are the starting quarterback. At the presser with the microphone on you, it's not the right call to do that. You can't throw your teammates under the bus. At some point, you either got to take accountability, or you just got to try and be efficient with your wording. Like, hey, things didn't click for us. We'll get it right next week. And, hey, even if it's not 100% your fault, sometimes the QB does have to take one for the team and say, maybe there were times where I could have managed the pocket a little bit better, right? Just say that and move on. You don't have to throw your teammates under the bus at the open mic, right? Because that can open up a whole new level of discord for the team. It's just the lack of maturity, the lack of awareness. Sometimes those things from the window that we get into it, if I were an NFL GM, I would be kind of scared to invest in that. I would. because that's the lifeblood of the team. That is the franchise QB. That guy's got to be rock solid on the field and off the field. And right now, we know Shedeur is talented. I think his arm is definitely good enough. I think the accuracy, the pro comp that's been drawn a lot at his maximum is Geno Smith, a guy who has that functional mobility, that accuracy, and enough velocity to get it where it needs to go. But at the same time, I don't think he's that elite level talent to reconcile any of this that we've seen off the field that's kind of contributing to all that uncertainty. So I have questions. And if I were an NFL GM, I would be scared to invest a first or second round pick in him. I would.
Yeah, all of those things are valid concerns. And those are concerns that, sure, there are a lot of things that I've seen that tell me that he is a first round talent as far as just a pure prospect. Yeah. But when we're at the quarterback position as the face of a franchise, those are things that are so crucial as far as your maturity, being able to lead a group of men. This is when you go to the next level and you're playing on Sundays, these are grown men. These aren't kids. And you can't, you're taking shots at your own offensive line. How does that inspire anybody? That's the thing is, can you galvanize the troops consistently with your own accountability and your own consistency, day in, day out, and play to play, snap to snap. And for him to throw shade when he made his fair share of mistakes and actually put them deeper in a hole against a quality opponent on the road, and you're taking shots at your own offensive line, and it's a major red flag for me, and it's disappointing because of what I thought I saw in the past. I did think that he was capable of being a leader, but certainly I want to see a lot more accountability moving forward. This one can still be put in the rear view mirror with his own play, but this is going to be hard to overlook, because when things don't go well, is that how your franchise quarterback is going to conduct himself? That's a concern.
Yeah, for sure. And it's hard not to draw the connection to Deion Sanders, the head coach, who has kind of fallen into the same traps sometimes, after a tough game, not taking full accountability, and you wonder if there's a connection there. But it's a tough situation. It really is. But the franchise QB evaluation, I think the main lesson to take away from it is the franchise QB evaluation is twofold. It's on the field and it's off the field. On the field, I think there are many arguments to make that Sanders is well within that discussion, being one of the top QBs in the class. But, it's happened enough off the field, whether it's at a press conference or on social media, where I'm just not sure that this is the kind of guy that I would want to build my franchise around.
It bothered me. It bothered me as a guy that believes in Shedeur Sanders. Yeah. This one was a lot of red flags, a lot of concerns. Yeah. Certainly, I'll be looking at him very, very closely as the rest of the season progresses, because if this thing goes south for Colorado, it's one loss. It's just one game. It's one loss. We'll see how he responds, but you just don't want to see him compound it and make it worse off the field when your on-field performance was already concerning enough.
Exactly. And what I want to say, you kind of pivoted to it pretty well, but we have 10 more games of the regular season to go, right? We've got a postseason. If they make it to the bowl eligibility, we'll see. But, there's still plenty of football left to be played, and there's plenty of time for Shedeur to actually take an actual honest look in the mirror and say, hey, maybe I need to change how I operate a little bit, right? Especially as a leader and things like that. So there is time, and they're all young guys, so they can learn. They have the capacity to do so. Yeah, they're kids, right? So there is the potential energy for that. I just hope that, this loss could be another kind of wake-up call where it's like, hey, and the presser wasn't an optimistic view of that, but maybe with time they can introspect a little bit more. But there is time. So again, kind of what we were saying at the very beginning of the podcast, it's too early to bury anyone or anoint anyone, right? We're still really rolling with the punches week after week, so we'll see. But there is uncertainty. I think that's the lesson to take away. We are going to get into our preview of week 3 shortly, but first off, Derek, any other performances from week 2 that caught your eye? I will throw one out there just for kicks and giggles. Ashton Jey, how about his game against Oregon, man? 3 touchdowns, I think over 150 yards. This dude was coming off a 267 6-touchdown outing against, I believe, Georgia Southern in week 1 for Boise State. Yep. That was a dominant outing. But then after that, people were saying, "Hey, do it again, right? Prove it against the top 10 team at Oregon," and he did just that. I can't say enough good things about Ashton Jey, man. I think he is as close to untackleable as you're going to get with that combination of elusiveness, running leverage, contact balance, vision, and creative instincts, right? The explosiveness and the speed. And they haven't used him as a receiving threat much this year, but he's got that in his arsenal too, man. So he's a fun player. There's only so much you can say before you're like, we're going to be talking about this guy for 10 minutes. We got to stop. He's legit. And I think this RB class is really starting to age pretty well. There are a few other RBs that stood out this past week too. I think Antonio Brown from Northern Illinois in that upset of Notre Dame, very fun game from him. 2 receptions for 126 yards and the touchdown, had an 83-yard catch where he motioned into the slot and one as a receiver, but then he's like 5'10", 219 pounds as a running back, so he can get right in your frame. He can churn forward, energized player. Love what I saw from Ontario Brown. Dylan Sampson from Tennessee, another, a successor to Jaylen Wright for the Volunteers. Not as fast as Wright on the vertical plane, but really smooth lateral mover. I liked his vision a lot. I think he's on the ascent. We're just seeing more and more names kind of emerge in this RB group, so it's a lot of fun. Jeanty was good. Were there any other RBs that kind of caught your eye?
Quinshon Judkins had himself after a ho-hum debut. Certainly had himself, I think, 108 yards and 2 scores on just like 9 carries. So
he is absurdly efficient. It's insane.
Yeah. So I was very, very encouraged. We saw Trevor Etienne's debut, highly efficient. But I mean, they were playing against Tennessee Tech. We'll see how he builds off that. But he did, he also was involved out of the backfield, which I wanted to see more of based off of what we saw in Florida. So that was nice to kind of see him a little bit involved in the passing game as well. Drew Aller actually met a little bit of
adversity
resistance and adversity against Bowling Green, the Falcons. But look, I thought Aller played well. I thought Tyler Warren looked outstanding. Dude, and you mentioned the tight end on the opposite end, Harold Fannin Jr. My goodness, 11 for 137 and a score. Rondé Gadsden, the tight end position is actually getting a little bit interesting past Colston Loveland. That's kind of piquing my interest a little bit as, through the first couple of games of the college football season.
Yeah, the talent is starting to blossom at that position. Tyler Warren, man, he has been incredible. I love the versatility. I love, it's funny because, again, when I was watching Theo Johnson last year, I was thinking to myself, Tyler Warren might end up being better than this guy. And then now we're kind of seeing the versatility, right? Just how many different things he can do. He can catch passes over the middle. He can take rack. He can block. Anything you need this guy to do. He is the ultimate utility tight end. And I love that because that is such a valuable thing at the NFL level. And Drew Aller clearly values it. He's going to him more than any of his weapons. So Tyler Warren is making himself available. Love that. Harold Fannin Jr. on the other side, man, he's had 2 really good weeks to start the year for Bowling Green. He is legitimately their top pass catcher. And you see that kind of production, that kind of consistency from a MAC prospect or a lower conference prospect. A lot of times that can be an indicator that this guy will not just get drafted, but maybe drafted pretty earlier than people expect. I love how fluid and smooth he is. His hands are very strong. They're always in the right spot. And he's got some role versatility to him as well. He can go quick outs. He can work up the seam. A lot of different ways that you can utilize him. So those 2 tight ends, Harold Fannin Jr. and Tyler Warren, that was a great tight end matchup to see last week.
Absolutely.
A few others that I'm trying to parse through my head here. Taylon Green from Arkansas.
Okay.
Yeah, real quick. He had over 400 yards, took Oklahoma State to overtime. Accuracy is still a concern at times, but Taylon Green, I think so far this year has been a pretty inspiring QB performer. He's got the talent. He's athletic, 6'6", 230 pounds, good arm talent, easy off-platform thrower. He's on my keep an eye on him list. I don't know if he's emerging or rising right now, but the talent is definitely there, and he's been racking up some numbers. He's been consistent enough to stay productive, which I think is the first barrier to crack when you're a college football player. So that was the last one that I wanted. You had any more?
I got one more. I want to get your thoughts on Jalen Milroe.
Against it was South Florida.
My South Florida Bulls. I once upon a time graduated from there 2010, walked onto the football team and did not play in a single game, but I did. But it was they met some adversity. The final score, 42-16, is not even remotely indicative of how competitive this football game was.
Spoke about the South Florida fan. No, I'm kidding.
That's fine. That's fine, but it's the truth. And I mean, this South Florida defense they love to bring pressure.
Yeah.
And they got home against Jaylen Milroe on multiple occasions. Milroe still looked outstanding as an athlete. I mean, as a off script creator and as just a ball carrier, he's dynamic. But Alabama has some concerns along the offensive line unit, in particular at right tackle. They had multiple touchdowns called back due to holding calls.
Yeah.
So this was a weird game, that makes me go, is USF better than we think? Because this is the second straight year that they've actually given Alabama a game. Or is Alabama do we have some concerns about Alabama? I thought it was a good performance from Jaylen Milroe. But it was kind of concerning that we knew exactly through the first couple drives, we knew USF was going to be highly aggressive and give this Alabama offense all kinds of vertical shots in man coverage. And Alabama didn't really pay it off. So is it the receivers? Was it Jaylen Milroe? Was it the protection? Just some things to maybe chew on a little bit for Jaylen Milroe. They still came away with the win. So it's not a bad bit of tape on Jaylen Milroe, but it was just something that caught my eye a little bit for this Alabama program and maybe, some things to look at for Milroe moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of South Florida and quarterbacks, Byron Brown on the other side is a name to watch as well. He is very talented.
It's a couple big throws.
Yeah, I know he's just the precision a little bit. You can hone it a little bit, fine tune it a little bit more. I think he's still pretty young and developing as a passer, but you can see the raw talent is there. He's athletic. He's got a live, elastic arm, really easy throwing motion. I'm excited to keep tabs on Byron Brown. I think eventually, I don't know if it's this year, probably next year at the earliest, but he could factor into the NFL draft discussion. We'll see. On the other side, I agree with you. I think Milroe is still kind of fine tuning as well. And the big hope heading into this year was that Kalen DeBoer and his influence would do something for Milroe as a passer. Because last year, Milroe was benched early in the year. He got the starting job back the week later, and then he ultimately led Alabama on a CFB playoff run. Like, he was probably the central force on offense for that run. And he's a very good college football quarterback. But as a prospect, some things like processing, intermediate and deep vision, right? Accuracy. Those are things that he's still honing, I think. And it's a good pivot because we got him on our top matchups this coming week. So we can lead off with that, actually. I know we got Georgia and Kentucky up first, but let's jump down to Alabama and Wisconsin real quick, and then we'll jump back up. But Jaylen Milroe, I think, has his first big test this week against Wisconsin. I think you look at what the Wisconsin defense has. They got John Pius through the transfer portal as an edge rusher from William and Mary. In the secondary, they got Ricardo Hallman, who's a ball hawk. They got Hunter Wohler as well at safety, explosive, two-phase threat. Jaylen Milroe, I think he hasn't been tested to that degree yet from a prospect standpoint. I think that USF game was a good window into seeing what we need to see from him still, right? Like, this is a guy who's going to lead your team to a win, but I think there's still cracks on the surface in the passing profile. And so this Wisconsin game is the first one that really puts that under the microscope, because you've got these guys in the secondary who, if Milroe is a little late with a read or a little bit too imprecise with his trajectory, these are the kinds of players, Ricardo Hallman in particular. He's a ball hawk. He will find the ball. He's great at reading routes and recognizing early. He's got great closing speed. He's a gnat in man coverage. He's a sleeper, and I like his game a lot. And I think he's the kind of player that could give Milroe fits if he's not up to snuff. And the thing with Milroe is, you mentioned it, the talent is through the roof. The guy is an A-plus athlete, 4.4 speed at around 6'2", 220 as well. He's a burly runner. Like, he's strong, powerful coming downhill. As a running threat, you can design your offense around him very well. And he's got the rocket arm too. Like, he can generate very easy velocity. But 2 games in, right? We've seen tangible progress from Drew Aller. We've seen tangible progress maybe from Cam Ward, you could argue. I think there's a few other guys you could argue, Quinn Ewers especially. We've seen tangible progress from those guys so far. I think we're still kind of static with Jaylen Milroe. And he hasn't been tested as much as those other guys, which is fair. But this is the first game. This is the first barometer game, I feel like, for Jaylen Milroe. We'll finally get to see, is he gonna start tracking toward that early round upside, or is he maybe gonna settle out as a mid-round prospect? I don't know. We don't know what the case is gonna be for him, but this Wisconsin game to me will be pretty enlightening in that element.
No, in that element, the one thing that I can say about Jalen Milroe's performance against USF, because this turned into a dogfight. I mean, sure, Alabama beat themselves. They fumbled 4 times in the second half, like something crazy, just wonky, weird game. But I didn't see any panic from Jalen Milroe. I didn't see him pressing, right? I didn't see him making matters worse, with maybe the exception of trying to hold the ball a little bit longer and create with his legs when protection would break down. And there's going to be some times where a great athlete like Milroe is going to try to make something happen and it's just not going to work out. And he kind of gets himself into a worse situation. I'd like to see less of that and maybe trying to punish an aggressive opposing defense through the air instead of trying to do it with your legs at times. But I also didn't see a lot of separation from the Alabama receivers, which was kind of surprising. So now you're going up against Wisconsin, who's a darn good football program. You just mentioned some of the talent that they have, both up front and on the back end. This is a test. And I'm concerned about the offensive line at right tackle. I know that they were without a starter in that contest. We'll see if he's available against Wisconsin. But some concerns. I'm very interested to see how Alabama responds against the Badgers.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the Badgers, it's a good test because on the offensive side too, I think Wisconsin has enough to maybe put up around 20 points. Tyler Van Dyke is still kind of erratic as a passer, not going to lie. He's got the arm talent for sure. I think he's a decent college QB, but as a prospect, there are still some holes in the game. But they got Ches Malusi coming back at running back, who's a really efficient runner. I liked his game a lot. He obviously had that season-ending injury, but he's back from it now, and he's playing pretty well. They also have a pretty solid offensive line. You look at the guys up front. They have, I can't remember the guard's name, but he's a solid player. The guard, Joe Huber, I believe, is the guard. He's pretty solid. He's athletic. They got Jack Nelson and Riley Mullman at tackle, really good tackle duo. So again, that Wisconsin offense and that offensive line in particular is a unit that could at least contend with Alabama in the trenches. I really like Alabama's defensive line. Again, Jamarian Latham, Tim Smith. They got some maulers up the middle, right? And Quay Robinson at edge, a veteran who's starting to come into his own this year. That'll be a fun test for sure. But I think the moral of the story for Milroe is you might be pressured a little bit on both sides of the ball. On the defensive side, trying to beat this secondary that has a lot of playmaking talent. And then on the other side, at least trying to not to keep up with Wisconsin. Wisconsin isn't that kind of high-powered offense, but they are a team that I think will at least stress you a little bit. They're one of those teams that will at least stay in it. And that proximity is always going to be a little bit of a pressure generator. So it'll be a fun test for Jalen Milroe. I think staying disciplined is one of the keys for him, but then also there may be some moments where this secondary forces him to make a pro-ready throw, that we haven't been accustomed to seeing him make as often because last year his process was still pretty inconsistent, even later into the year. I think he progressed for sure. I think that Auburn game was a great test for him. I think against Michigan, he made a couple nice throws too, but I think that down-to-down consistency is something that he's still trying to find when it comes to, seeing the reads, diagnosing and triggering quickly. And then also just, keeping the mechanics in tune because sometimes he's a little arm dominant and that can push throws over their targets, can be a little erratic with the placement. So a lot of things to fine tune. I think this Wisconsin game will be a great barometer for that. And we'll see what happens, but the talent is through the roof. So I think it's a must watch just because of that. Any closing thoughts on Wisconsin, Alabama before we move on to another one?
No, that true freshman rookie, or not rookie, true freshman. I'm sitting here getting my fantasy and my scouting mixed up a little bit. The true freshman wide receiver for Alabama, he's one worth keeping an eye on. I'm excited. Maybe he's a 2027 candidate. I'm trying
to remember his name. I don't remember his name. I know we got Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State. Look that up real quick because I want. As we speak, he's looking it up because I know we got Jeremiah Smith, who's a very talented player for Ohio State already. Looks like the real deal for sure. And there's a few other guys. DJ Lagway is going to be a fun player to watch for that 2027.
Ryan Williams.
Okay, so there we go. Yeah, these blue chip schools, they always have the conveyor belt when it comes to talent. So whenever you see a true freshman who's making plays, it's kind of hard not to at least get him on a list and say like, hey, let's
excited to see more. I'm excited to see more.
Especially if you're a Devy guy. Which how many Devy leagues are you in again?
Oh, I'm in no Devy leagues. I'm in Dynasty.
No. Okay,
Dynasty, which is just NFL. But
okay,
I'm always I probably could play in a Devy league at this point, just because obviously I'm scouting and following all these prospects now. So keeping an eye on all these guys. It's just very excited to always look ahead.
Bro, I honestly, Debbie was too much for me. I thought it would be in my wheelhouse for the same reason, but I got in there and I was like overthinking everything. It's like, oh, maybe this guy will be good. Maybe this guy, bro, just chill, calm down, lock in. I can't do it. I can't do Debbie. It's just too much. It's information overload. Speaking of information overload, we got Georgia and Kentucky as our next one. A lot of prospects in this one, but I think the first one to watch is obviously Carson Beck versus the Kentucky defense. The Kentucky offense has not really gotten off the runway yet this year. Brock Vandegrift and Gavin Wimsatt were pretty. They kind of traded off this past week and not a lot of production. I think that they have a receiving trio that's pretty solid with Dane Key, Berrien Brown, Jamari Macklin. But I think the offense around those guys has struggled to catch and take hold. So that offense is not a great pressure generator. But on the defensive side, you got Deion Walker, you got JJ Weaver, you got Jamon Dumas Johnson, you got Maxwell Hairston at corner. There's a lot of talent that could put some pressure on Carson Beck, especially Deion Walker. And I think this is just as big a game for Deion Walker too, because he's been pretty quiet to start this year. He has not been as productive through 2 weeks as he was last year. And against the Georgia offensive line, you have a number of talents who will test you. You got Xavier Truss at right tackle, Ernest Green III at left tackle, who, by the way, Ernest Green III has really had a solid season so far. He was a day 3 grade for me entering the year. I would take him early rounds if he keeps up this pace, because I think his technique has been better. I think he's been a little quicker out of his stance. I think his hands have been more violent and precise. I've liked a lot of what I've seen. I think that Clemson game was a really solid introduction for him, and he's really taken a step up. So Ernest Green at the tackle spot, if Deion Walker is taking those 5 tech looks. But if he's inside, you got Tate Ratledge, who's a very solid player, a very solid veteran, and you've got Jared Wilson at center, who is starting to break out a little bit. I think balance and anchor against power are still issues for him, but at 6'3", 310, he's very well leveraged. He's powerful, explosive, rangy on the attack. I think the offensive line is once again a major strength for Georgia. And so for Deion Walker, who hasn't really been productive so far this year, and one of the big issues from last year being 6'6", 348 pounds, the dude is a giant, but sometimes pad level is a pretty big issue for a player like that. And I think we've still seen that pop up this year. So against Georgia, that is going to be a big test for him. But then Carson Beck as well, trying to stay productive against this defense that could have some talents. Max Harrison in particular is a ball hawk at corner. He's got the closing speed. I think he's really good at tracking the ball and impacting it in the air. So that'll be a fun one. What are you looking for in this matchup? I know Carson Beck, he's kind of been, for me anyway, he's still QB1 by default. Again, he would be probably a late first round grade for me. He graded around JJ McCarthy for me in my preliminary look. So not a guy who's running away with the mantle, but if he keeps playing steady, I think he can give himself as good a chance as anyone, because you just look at, who would I want to invest in? If you know he's going to be like a Jared Goff level passer, would you take it? I mean, I would take that in round 1, at least, if that's what you know, because that gives you a chance, right? Carson Beck at least feels like that kind of prospect so far.
Yeah, no, we've just seen what we needed to see from Carson Beck through the first 2 weeks, and that's okay. Yeah. I mean, in particular against Clemson, I didn't think he played bad. I want to see more from the tight ends. We haven't seen very much from Oscar Delp. I think he had his one catch. Ben
Yurosek has been pretty quiet too, so I've been surprised by that as well.
Yeah, so obviously it was nice to kind of see what we got from Trevor Etienne in his debut after a suspension to start the year. Just to kind of see this test against Kentucky. I'm not going to say Kentucky's an elite defensive unit, but certainly I want to see Deion Walker give me something against a quality offensive line unit. I am looking at Deion Walker because the physical tools are through the roof, and he should be more dominant than what we've seen through the start of this year. So, because he's a first round physical talent, but the technique concerns, leverage, you can be, you can have all of the physical tools you want. If you're not disciplined with your technique over snap to snap, in particular, when you start facing off against an offensive line unit like Georgia, I'm interested to see what type of impact he has in this contest. So certainly that matchup up front is the one that I'm really keeping an eye on entering this contest. And of course, I just want to see more from Carson Beck.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one because Deion Walker is the type of player who can make an impact from multiple spots, right? You watch his tape from 2023, and he's 6'6", 348, and he's taking reps at 7-tech outside the tackle, rushing with speed to power. All right, that doesn't happen with that kind of player, not very often at all. So when you see it, it's pretty impressive. And I think Carson Beck is the kind of quarterback who can mitigate that with his pocket navigation. Like, his depth discipline, I think, is very good. He steps up quickly. I think he doesn't put too much fat on his drop back, and he knows when to use those micro movements and those little ancillary lanes and corridors to keep himself clean while his eyes are up. So Carson Beck, to me, pocket navigation and poise, those are two big pluses with him. And Deion Walker is the type of battering ram talent who can put that at risk or kind of stress that a little bit. So it'll be a fun little dichotomy to see how they play off of each other. But kind of not a prove it game, but a game. It can be a statement game for both guys, because Deion Walker is playing against a really talented front, and Carson Beck is playing against a player who can be that kind of X factor for a defense. He's one of those guys, kind of like a Micah Parsons, where you got to keep your eyes on him at all times. You got to be aware of where this guy is. So Deion Walker is that kind of talent, and that raw talent who can, disrupt from different angles. So it'll be a fun one for sure. Our next one on the game front, and then we'll get to some head-to-heads to close it out. But we got Texas A&M and Florida as an SEC matchup. I don't think either of these teams are ranked anymore. I think Texas A&M fell out of the top 25. Florida has dealt with some issues. DJ Lagway put up massive numbers last week, though, in relief for Mertz. Like we said earlier, probably a guy to watch for 2026 or 2027. I think 27. Yeah, because he's only a true freshman. We're looking ahead a little too much, but I'm getting the numbers jumbled, man. I swear. But Connor Wegman and DJ Lagway is a pretty fun future look at QB. We don't know if Wegman is going to declare at this point this year, because he's been a little up and down so far. I think we're still looking for, again, the down-to-down consistency. That Notre Dame game was not a big red flag, but one that was kind of like, when I was watching it, I was like, maybe he needs a little more seasoning than we thought.
Right.
Because he didn't find a rhythm early. He looked a little off kilter with his mechanics and his release for a long time in that game. And another thing that I thought was up and down on his tape entering the season was the pocket navigation. I think he's a really easy mover and off-platform thrower again, but sometimes his feet are kind of free-flowing a little too much. Sometimes he's drifting out of proper position, and sometimes he's drifting into pressure too. So I think there's still ways for him to counteract that. Against Florida, you've got a pretty solid defensive line, not one that's got a ton of elite talent. So I think it could be a good test for him, for sure, Connor Wegman, to try and bounce back a little bit and get a win against the team in a winnable game in the conference. That'll be a test for him. And then in the trenches, my matchup that I'm looking forward to is Austin Barber, offensive tackle for Florida, against Nick Scorton, the edge rusher for Texas A&M. Scorton's been off to a fast start. He's a great pass rusher at 6'4", 280. He's got power and finesse. But Austin Barber, I think, has the athletic tools to be an early round tackle. I just think balance and, again, anchor for him are areas where he can improve. But he's got the matching ability. I think he has the size and the length. I think he's got everything that he needs. It's just Nick Scorton is that kind of player who's going to test him early. So yeah, that'll be a fun one for sure. Anything that's catching your eye here, tickling your fancy with this matchup?
No, you nailed it with Austin Barber versus Nick Scorton. That's the one that I want to see. I mean, we're going to see Lagway, who I love the physical tools. Obviously, a dynamic dual threat guy, has a live arm. All those things that you understand why you can get so excited about him and see the potential. But if that ball's not coming out of his hands, Scorton's going to he's going to introduce himself in this contest, is what I'm going to say. I like Barber, and I'm very intrigued to see, because this is a great test for him. And certainly one where he could maybe see his stock climb a little bit with a quality outing against Nick Scorton. But if you're asking me who's going to win probably more battles than not, it's probably going to be Scorton. And it's probably not going to help that Lagway, if he holds the ball and tries to create, you could run yourself into trouble against this Texas A&M front.
Yeah, they don't just have Scorton, too. They got Shamar Turner on the other side, who's another really good speed-to-power rusher. They got a few guys inside, Shamar Stewart as well. So, that's a defensive line, a defense that's always going to test those opponents. But Austin Barber, man, I think it's in particular for him, because I know that Florida offensive line against Miami got a lot of flack for giving up a ton of pressures, right? But I think Austin Barber, in spite of the inconsistencies that you see, I do think the traits are there to be a solid prospect. So if he can show out against Scorton, that would be a big feather in his cap for sure. Let's get into some head-to-head matchups for the last 5 minutes we got here. I compiled this list before the podcast, and I think there's one that both of our eyes are gravitating towards. So, Derek, why don't you just introduce that one? Probably the best head-to-head matchup this week. I think we're on the same page here, but reveal it for the listeners here.
Yeah. Colorado State wide receiver Tory
Yes,
Horton versus Colorado cornerback wide receiver Swiss Army knife, do it all player, and Travis Hunter. So, we saw Tory Horton last year against this Colorado defense. I think that Horton comes back. We know what we're going to get with Tory Horton. But his game in particular, I'm interested to see how Travis Hunter responds, because a minor gripe, but one gripe that I saw and a rep that I hated that makes me think Travis Hunter's probably going to play wide receiver in the NFL. He made a business decision around the goal line against Nebraska. Instead of sticking your nose in there and doing everything you can to try to keep a ball carrier out of the end zone, he pulls up and just lets him run into the end zone. But I'm not high on Hunter because he's because of his physicality as a run support player. It's more so his ability to get in you defensively, identify routes, and beat receiver, run the route for the receiver in a lot of circumstances, which I'm wondering with Horton, who's more of a technician than he is an overwhelmingly explosive athlete. I'm wondering how that technician versus highly instinctive cornerback, how that's going to play out between these two. I'm very excited for it.
Yeah, me too. And I think the biggest thing you mentioned, the physicality, right? I've always been of the mind that Travis Hunter's brand of physicality fits at receiver a little bit better than it does at corner, because at corner, when you're jamming at the line and press, or whether you're jamming at the second level off of releases, right, or stems, you need to obstruct, you need to impose physicality a little bit more. Whereas when you're a receiver, you're working on the attack. The corner is working to match you upfield. Sometimes they're pedaling a little bit. Sometimes they're matching backward, right? So as a receiver, you are inclined a little bit more to attack and deconstruct, as opposed to obstruct and get in the way of guys. You can kind of attack and decouple and kind of break free upfield. I think being on the attack with that physicality, using his movement in tandem with that fits Travis Hunter's style a little bit better to me, because I think when he is tasked with obstructing and limiting guys, he's 6'1", 185, probably a little bit lighter. He naturally doesn't quite have the frame to do that, I don't think,
right.
And we see that sometimes. So I think that'll be a nice contrast for this one, because Tory Horton is a player at, I think, around 6'2", 188, but he's got really good size and length. I think, my comp for him was Dontavian Wicks. And I think, you got the twitch, you've got the targeted physicality with him too. He's a player who knows how to use his size to get free from guys. And I think Travis Hunter will be tested by that, because Hunter has great matching ability, elite matching ability, the fluidity, the ball hawking potential as well. But the one gripe that I have and that you have with him is that obstructing and kind of matching up the physicality is something that he doesn't always do quite as well. Tory Horton is a very physical receiver. He's nuanced, right. He's physical, and he can win at the catch point with those strong hands. So I think this will be a great test for both of them. But I'm particularly intrigued to see what Tory Horton can do, because we know he's been productive, but a good performance against a potential blue chip talent like this could really raise his stock from, I think right now he's a fringe top 100 guy. This could lock him into the top 100 a little bit more as a really solid mid-round prospect. So we will see, but that'll be a fun one. I'll rattle through the rest of the head-to-heads, and then we'll get out of here. We got UNLV wide receiver Ricky White against Kobe Bryant from Kansas State. Kobe Bryant, a ball hawk, really good speed, closing speed, a little lighter featherweight, but Ricky White's got that tracking ability, that twitch, that route running. So I think White's a sleeper. He could enter the mid-rounds as well. Keep an eye on that one. We got Arizona QB Noah Fifita, wide receiver Tedero McMillan versus the Kansas State defense. Pretty standard. Kansas State is a top 15 squad in the nation, so Arizona will be tested. I'm really looking forward to see what T-Mac can do against Jacob Parrish and other players in that secondary. LSU QB Garrett Nussmeier and wide receivers Kyron Lacey and CJ Daniels going up against South Carolina safety Nick Amenwari. Amenwari had a pick six last week, returned it through a giant crowd. Freak athlete at safety. He can make plays on the ball. He can enforce and support. Kyron Lacey's been really good with his tracking this year. Physicality. CJ Daniels is more of a vertical threat, but Nussmeier has been a very good game manager, field general as well. So keep an eye on that one. That'll be a fun one. Arkansas State center Jacob Bayer against Michigan's defensive line. Could be a sleeper in the center class. Missouri offensive tackles Marcus Bryant, Armand Mambu versus Boston College edge Donovan Ezeraku. Ezeraku, more of a speed to power guy, a little bit smaller, but he can get around the edge. He's got bend, so keep an eye on that. We got Oregon receivers Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson versus Oregon State corner Kobe Singleton, transferred from Liberty. Another ball hawk, just knows how to get around the football. Those guys always have a chance. Tulane wide receiver Mario Williams, remember him from USC, transferred over. He's playing against Oklahoma's secondary, so a lot of talent there. Purdue quarterback Hudson Card against Notre Dame's defense. We got Pitt wide receiver Kanata Mumpfield against Western Virginia DB Aubrey Burks. We've got Appalachian State Joey Aguilar at QB facing off against Savon Ravel from
let's go.
That's going to be a fun one because Joey Aguilar can sling it, but Savon Ravel, I feel like, has not really had an opportunity to rack up plays on the ball yet this year. And I think Aguilar is definitely going to be unstoppable force meets an immovable object type of scenario there. And Revel is a top 15 prospect on our board at PFN, so that'll be a fun one to watch. We got UConn offensive tackle Chase Lunt against Duke edge Vincent Anthony Jr. We've got UTSA nose tackle Joseph Evans, former LSU player, so keep an eye on him. He's got the raw talent for sure. Going up against that Texas interior offensive line. Ole Miss tackle Micah Pettis against Wake Forest edge Jasheen Davis. Davis has been one of my favorite day 3 sleepers. I think he's got a really good pass rush arsenal. We got Toledo edge Anthony Dunn Jr. transferred over from Florida A&M, another fun sleeper against Mississippi State. And then we have Maryland receiver Tay Felton, who's been a breakout candidate so far this year with his speed, his size, his fluidity after the catch, his rack threat, going up against Virginia defensive back Jonas Sanker and that entire defense. So a lot of head-to-head matchups, a lot of fun stuff on the way for week 3. Derek, any closing thoughts for our listeners before we get out of here?
One thing I wanted to keep a close eye on, we've seen some great things from Cam Ward, Miami quarterback, to start the year. And they're taking on a USF defense that just kind of gave Jalen Milroe some issues. I really am intrigued to see how this aggressive defense from USF, who showed signs of life against the Alabama Crimson Tide on the road, I'm interested to see how Cam Ward responds against this high-pressure defense. I think it'll be an underrated but a nice test with to see how he handles a defense that is hyper-aggressive and tries to heat him up. And we can see Cam Ward, he's either going to punish this aggressive South Florida defense, or maybe we'll get some answers to the test as far as his ability to handle pressure on a consistent basis this upcoming week.
For sure. And I think one of the biggest knocks on Cam Ward so far in his evaluation coming into this year was he's got the talent for sure, but the volatility, especially under pressure, is something that could show up in his game. So USF, they're aggressive. They like to blitz. Will they get Cam Ward uncomfortable under pressure, or will he be able to stay composed and stay productive and lead them to a comfortable win? We will see. But I think the moral of the story is leave no stone unturned in the CFB landscape. A lot of prospects, a lot of quality talent, and a lot of great games on tap for the next week and the weeks to come. Thank you, as always, for listening through the season. We really appreciate you all sticking with us. We will be back next week with NFL Draft and CFB analysis. For Derek Tate, I'm Ian Cummings. Thank you, as always, for listening to the PFN Scouting Podcast. Peace out. Have a good one.